Hello and welcome to the Serie A Chronicles Q&A episode. I'm your host for this, Sabina Rizuki, and as always, I'm joined by Nicky Bandini as we look through and try to answer your questions. If you're wondering, no, we're still not over it. I cannot believe that Italy are still out of the World Cup. It's going to take a very, very long time and possibly thousands of pounds spent on therapists. Nicky, right. We shall answer the first one. Stephen, who's a Chronicles Tifoso. He's a Patreon member. Hello, Stephen. And this was a question that was near and dear to our producer, Simon, who has waged war on Ciro Immobile. And I do feel like a lot of fans have too. So this was, Stephen, you really did ask the right question there to get yourself mentioned. Does Ciro Immobile scoring a bundle for Lazio show that Serie A is a very average league? Ooh, you hurt me there. Given that he is clearly way out of his depth at international level. Also on the same lines, does Tammy Abraham scoring 20-plus goals for Roma further prove my point? Is Tammy brilliant or is Serie A easy? For me, it's pretty clear what the answer is. Oh, what is it then? You might as well tell us. You can't just say that.
Well, I think Stephen is clearly leading us towards the conclusion that, yes, it's just easy to score goals in Serie A, which I disagree with on that front. I think there's... our old friend Matteo Bonetti Mina actually did like a big long Twitter thread of this not long ago of sort of strikers who've played in Italy saying, no, it's really hard to score goals in Italy. And among them, Cristiano Ronaldo, among them, Carlos Tevez, among them, all sorts of forwards, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, the forwards who have played in different leagues and come to play in Italy, pretty much universally, and not just while they're in Italy as well, like, in interviews given afterwards, talk about it as being quite a hard place to score goals. This idea that it's just easier in Serie A, I roll my eyes a little bit at that. I think it might be easier for Ciro Immobile specifically. I think that every single player, being a human being, will have contexts that suit them better and contexts that suit them less well. And I think unquestionably, Immobile's career, I think, was saved, frankly, given how badly things went for him at Dortmund as well, not just international football, but when he went to Dortmund, it was saved by working with Simone Inzaghi. He came back to Italy at Lazio and ran into a coach who, well, had been supplied with some pretty good supporting talent as well, by the way. Lazio had some good players, but who was willing to design a team to his strengths. And Immobile's strengths has always been, if you can give him space on the counter to run, to get that bit of that first step, that bit of acceleration going, to get in behind the defender, he can exploit those direct balls really, really well. And he knows how to make those runs off a defender. He knows how to play on the shoulder of a defender. He knows how to do that. And maybe there's also something in his personality. I'm inclined to say there is something in his personality, unfortunately, that I think some footballers feel. And again, it's not just footballers, right? Like, it applies to anything. It applies to anyone in any job. Some of us feel better and do our best work when everyone around us is giving us a hug and giving us a pat on the back and saying you're doing great. And some people do their best work when someone is screaming in their face, you're terrible and try harder. Like, that's just different human characters, right? Like, some people want to have adversity thrown at them all the time and to sort of rail against it. And that's how they thrive. Like, they thrive by fighting. And I don't think that Immobile is a fighter. I think Immobile is actually, like, despite having a bit of a party boy image, I think he's quite a gentle soul. Weirdly, I think he's quite a sort of, I say this with tenderness because in my life, many of my favorite people are like this, but like, I think he's quite a soft soul. And, look, being sort of brutal about it, he's been a disaster for Italy. And I have been in the camp that wanted him to be, well, he has. Like, we've played, Mina's got the giggles now, and it's not helping me, but we've played We've played World Cup playoffs. He has, Mina. Like it's horrible to say it, but it's true. We've played World Cup playoffs against Sweden and Macedonia, and we haven't scored a goal in any of them. Do you know who was up front for all three of those games? Ciro Immobile. Like, we can talk about João Pedro, we can talk about Ventura not bringing Insigne off the bench against Sweden. He's had 3 World Cup playoff games, and he hasn't scored in any of them, even more than any of the other numbers. That's brutal. Like, that's your job. That's literally like your job is to score those goals, and you haven't done it. I think there is a bigger problem for Italian football, which is who else is doing it? Who's your other number 9 in Italy who you feel really confident would step in and do that job? We don't have a great number 9 right now. We don't have Luca Toni. We don't have Christian Vieri, who I grew up watching. We don't have, even a Schilacci, who didn't have that great club career, but did it for the national team in the Notte Magica of 1990. That's the reality. But yeah, but I don't think you can just go, Serie A is easy. Tammy Abraham is a very similar story to me. He's gone to a club that has made its entire team around how he plays, and that's a good thing for him. I just don't think it's that simple, is my opinion. Without question, there's different types of football played in different countries as well. I had my interview with Fikayo Tomori last week. He talked about how Italian football he described it as more like American football, whereas Premier League is like basketball, like one is played at like helter-skelter pace without as much sort of tactical thought and positioning, whereas in Italy there's much more it's slower, but there's more thinking. Some players are going to suit that better than others. What do you think, Mina? I feel like I've been wittering on this one.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess Liga must be really hard because Messi scored a lot for Barcelona and he can't seem to score a lot for PSG.
Yeah.
I think that I actually know why you make these judgments, because you know what? I think about those judgments a lot. And I'm someone who might go through a lot of those statistics, and I still will say, well, I guess maybe it is easier for like Romelu Lukaku to just shine and do everything perfectly. But then I think, well, actually he did shine in the Premier League, but it was for Everton. Maybe not for Chelsea. So, and you know what? He didn't shine in the Champions League games either, but shined a little bit more in some of the, he didn't shine against Juventus. I think it has to do Mohamed Salah. I mean, he was at Fiorentina, he was at Roma, but the guy turned into a superstar in Premier League. And like
that's a great example. It's a great counterexample.
Does that mean that it's just really easy and he's got tons of space, which is why he can operate? I mean, it is like you have to go through the difference, and there is always going to be examples of this and that, and where it looks like Italian football can be harder. But it is like Nicky says, it does depend on what the team is. It does depend if you have Klopp as your manager or you have, I don't know, somebody else that no one's heard of, Eusebio Di Francesco as your manager or whatever it is, There is somebody who will be a pragmatist or someone where it's a philosophy and you have to try to blend into the philosophy. Romelu Lukaku is not playing with a team right now that play to his absolute strengths. So whereas he was very much the center of the project in Inter and had a great side that just wanted to play off these 3 big points, including Achraf Hakimi and Lukaku, so they were allowed to shine a little bit more, But I certainly don't think that when you see like Neymar and Messi having certain problems in Liga, well, I think that Liga is a harder league than anything else in my lifetime. So I do think that these things they can't be measured in that way. Whether or not Serie A is at the level of the Premier League, no. But there's obviously, we've discussed all the reasons for it. But I still think, and to this day, even coaches think that it is a place where you can pick up a great education, which is why when Barcelona and some of the biggest clubs in the world came in for De Ligt, he said, no, I want to go to Juventus. I want to go to Italy more than anything, because I want to understand the tactics, because it is a different league and it makes you think differently. And that was the whole point of Zidane's journey in his life, is he wanted to get the tactics, he wanted to get the technique, he wanted to really make himself the best version that he can be to being the all-rounded champion that he turned into. And actually, as a coach, he leans heavily on everything that he's learned in Serie A. I mean, obviously, he played in a different time when it was at the very top of the game, but I still think that even if you look at like our core principles on a tactical level, Pep Guardiola has borrowed a lot from the Italian league, and I think these things are important going forward. It's still Italian tacticians that make the difference. And so, anyway, I mean, when you think about how many of these wonderful English players play in the Premier League and that represented England, and how many of the Italian players play in our league and represented Italy. Italy's done really well, in the Euros. Maybe not in the World Cups, but I wouldn't say that it's... Anyway, this is difficult. As for Ciro Immobile, I do love when Nicky called him a disaster.
I'm sorry. I feel bad about it now because you'd asked so much. I feel guilty.
No, I laughed because you never say these things. You're always so nice. Like, I can understand when you were went into your tenderness moment, and I really had that. Do you guys ever have this? I don't know if anyone has this here, but I hear a word and it just starts off a song for me. Yeah, so I don't know if you guys remember Tenderness. Na, na, na. Anyway, it's from Clueless. It's one of my favorite movies growing up. But and so I just come up with all these things whenever she says something. But Ciro Immobile, he's not a bad striker. The problem with Ciro Immobile is that he's an emotional striker. It's a little bit like Morata will score a ton of goals for Real Madrid in all the Champions League games, managed a great comeback for Juventus against Bayern Munich. But for some reason, when people depend on him, the guy crumbles, And there's an emotional level there where he relies a lot on how he's feeling and what makes him feel good, because he doesn't need 4 touches of the ball. At Lazio, he would have struck that straight away. And I don't know why he's not doing it. And Del Piero had similar issues, by the way. There were a lot of players. Like Podolski was the other way around. He was rubbish for all the clubs he played for a lot of the time. But for some reason, you give him a German shirt, him and Miroslav Klose were just God. So sometimes it changes the other way. And I can't,
I just think with Immobile, he's a really peculiar character, because he is, like, being a centre forward in football is a really specific thing, right? Like, it is like you do carry a burden that the rest of the team doesn't. If you are playing that sort of classic number 9 role, you are the one who in the end is most expected to stick that ball in the net. Maybe you don't have to do it every game, every time, but over time, your team is relying on you to be the person who does that job, which is literally what decides whether or not you win or lose a football game, right? Did the ball go in the net or not? That's how football works. And I still remember when he was chasing the season when he scored 36 goals. So he was European Golden Boot, and he was giant record all-time scorer in Serie A. There was a point where he was close to it and he hadn't quite got there yet. And he said something in post-game interview where he's like, I really hate it when I absolutely have to score a goal. And you think that's the opposite of the sentiment you expect to hear from a number 9. You expect to hear, I love scoring goals. It's my favorite thing and I want to do it all the time. Whereas that's always stayed with me, the sort of the acknowledgement that to me it's acknowledgement that he hates pressure. That's what it sounds like to me. He doesn't relish it, which some people hate and some people love.
This is why I was saying that it's important for these good players to make the move quickly, And I do as in when you reach a stage where you have to get out of your comfort zone and you have to try the challenge, and it could lead in failure, but it will add so much to your ability to face pressure and overcome it. I mean, one of the things that we always speak about was how it's so nice when you go to English stadiums, how much they support their teams and how we don't have this culture in Italy, right? In Italy, everyone's always booing you. And it was very much the same when I was living in Madrid at the Bernabeu. Di Stefano said that everyone gets booed, including himself, even the greats. And that was what I think helped contribute to a great national team, because when you get booed every day, by the time, you're in the World Cup, pressure doesn't affect you anymore. That's why there were great leaders at the time, is because, everything written in the papers that used to get to all the English footballers at the time when Capello was coach didn't get to Italians, because they just, at that point, they faced so much criticism on daily life that they've gotten used to it. But what I feel now is that I don't think the newspapers have gone soft, but the players are not facing the big challenges. They're not overcoming the big challenges. We need Inter to play more games in Anfield. We need, Juventus to actually get past the last 16. And we need the big teams to do well and to invest in the youth that we have. And by the way, they do a lot, because I'm not looking here at Liverpool and thinking to myself, look at all the young English players playing for them. When I think of Liverpool, I think of Sané, I think of Sorry, Mane. I think I was thinking of Bayern Munich a second ago. I think of Mane, I think of Salah, I think of Diego Jota, I think of, Van Dijk. Jordan Henderson is, this isn't, it's not necessarily a youth problem. It's about getting really that leadership back into the team. But I am going off topic now. For Ciro Immobile, for me, he is a Lazio player and he's never going to be really more than that. Sorry.
The second question is not really a question, to be honest with you. It's just a message we got from Misak, who is a Chronicles tifoso. He's one of our Patreon members. But it was sort of a message that was almost like a suggestion of how he thinks Serie A could be improved. And I thought it was interesting enough that maybe we should explore it as a topic instead of even though it's not technically a question, I thought it was worth exploring. So thank you, Misak. Misak writes, if we're going to press for youth, then we need coaches like Allegri and their backward philosophy of apprenticeship to give more chances to young players to actually test them early to see if they're good enough. In my opinion, there should be a rule that would force teams to start an under-21 player for 4 games a season, or a 4-point deduction would be given. That will force the big teams to actually play the kids they have and see if there will be a diamond among them. Mina, I think this is actually quite a low bar that Mesak has set. 4 games for an under-21 player sounds to me like something that most teams are probably going to do anyway. If you literally just say any 4 games as well, like, will that just lead to teams sort of leaving that be a thing right for the very end of the season? But I'm curious, like, what you would think about this idea that one of the solutions to a problem that we've sort of talked about on the main podcast this week, and we sort of agreed maybe it was a problem, that there's not enough young players, Italian players, being given opportunities. That a solution to that would be to somehow implement a system that forces teams to use those players for a certain number of games and would punish them in a tangible way. Misak is talking about a 4-point punishment, so it's very tangible for not doing it. How do you feel about that?
Well, here's the thing. I actually disagree with this whole war on we're not including enough youth. I actually think there's lots of young players playing in Serie A at the highest level, and I think that a lot of them have been called up. I don't see this great big issue in comparison to all the other teams when they're saying, yeah, well, they're bleeding youth in. And a lot of these statistics can be skewed because you're talking about La Liga, for example, and some of these articles that were noted, because they have Athletic Bilbao, which can only hire and only, play players that come from the region. That's the whole point of Athletic Bilbao. So a lot of these, you have to look at what's going on there, like as in Argentina is a country that relies heavily on these, on schools and growing up in your academy and going on to win things. And I think that to myself, like, what have they won other than the Coppa recently? But Italy won it too. So the Euros, I think there's a lot of youth. I don't look at this team and I think to myself, my God, it's so old. I did think that way about Ventura, and I think that we made and took the right steps going forward. I think that there are B teams now. I don't think we dip in as much as we should, maybe in the mark of in going into our youth sections and bringing up players and playing them. But I also feel that that's not the issue. The issue that we have is Serie A is not doing very well. And when Serie A is not doing well, we need to get it back into a healthy stage, which isn't actually putting... I'm going to put this in a very unusual terms, but my niece is staying with me right now, and she is a law student. And she is basically... long story, my old niece is much older than me, so I have a very old niece. So she's discussing with me why we don't have this 70% rule where we tax all the rich 70%. Yeah. And I said, okay, if we did that, don't you think they'll just pack up and go? Like, as in I do that. If I was really rich and I was being taxed 70%, I'll just go somewhere where it doesn't, it's a tax haven, right? And she's like, yeah, but then, help them basically. And I said, okay, well then who's going to pay the wages? And what if they're really rich and they've employed 750 people who then are all contributing tax? And then you have an employment force there. And then I said, where would you get that money? Do you think there'll be like a drought in the economy because all these rich people have gone and taken with them all the contacts and ability to build companies? And then she thought about this and goes, yeah, you're right. She goes, so we shouldn't tax anyone. And I was like, okay, wait, hold on. And so we were having this back and forth because because this is kind of the balance of trying to do things, intelligently and growing them, Youth is important, but there's really no point right now if I'm sitting there calling up like Nicolo Fagioli and all of these, and I can't win against Villarreal. Do you know what I mean? Because the league will keep going down, and there's less of an opportunity for these players to actually reach the bigger challenges and to face the bigger teams and to learn from that and become leaders. The reason why Giorgio Chiellini, Leonardo Bonucci are where they are is because they went through that process, and it's Jorginho with Chelsea went through that process. And so I think that it's important that right now we get our teams back to actually getting to the latter stages of the Champions League, to taking Europa League seriously, where they are experiencing different styles of play, different types of competition, pressure at the highest level, and overcoming that, pressure. The whole point that we sit there and saying Lorenzo Insigne is not doing well is because it comes from a club that's always nearly there, but never there. That's the whole point. So I think we need to concentrate on getting a lot of these players to, getting our teams back there, trying to overcome the madness in Serie A and rebuild. That starts with stadium, more money, getting, better money, better players on board. And so they have something to look at and learn from. At the end of the day, Thiago Silva learned from Alessandro Nesta. And it's a whole process. And maybe he will teach somebody else. And that's the whole process that you get. But foreigners can be a wonderful thing in our league, by the way, Look at England has created a beautiful team and they have lots and lots of foreigners. But it's about also understanding that we need to get our players back into situations where their biggest challenge is not facing, Venezia, but potentially facing a Barcelona.
It's such a complicated question. I mean, your niece's thoughts on the tax system, and that's a whole conversation that I can't even enter into. We could get into a really big conversation about how we fix the world. I have feelings, but I won't start that. I won't start that conversation. Yeah, we'll have a separate politics podcast. But I'm quite skeptical with these sorts of problems. With any problem you've got that you perceive, you can sort of approach it with a carrot or a stick, right? And I'm quite skeptical when you start and approach these problems with a stick, because I think it tends not to work. Like, I think it's better if you're going to try and find a solution to this to make it incentivized rather than punish teams for doing something that you see as wrong. Give them incentives to do something that you want them to do, right? Which, if you want to encourage that youth sort of football development, I've just seen this statement, so I haven't come up with some great answer yet, but I would rather see a solution that makes it sort of rewarding to use your youth players rather than punishes you for not using them. I think you have to accept as well, like with any rule that you bring in like that, if it's going to be a rule, expect clubs to find the fine print, to find the loophole, to find the way of doing it that is not going to get the outcome that you imagined, that is going to sort of tick the box in a way that is not what you aimed for. So I think legislating these things is really, really, it's really tricky and complicated. And I think you have to accept that in club football, there are different incentives to in international football. And that's actually no different in Italy to any other country, right? I have been talking to coaches in the last few days, and I have heard coaches say to me, there's too many foreigners in Serie A. And that conversation has been had in the Premier League forever. Like, that conversation is not exclusive to Serie A. That conversation is everywhere. I think the thing that Italian football needs still most of all, in my opinion, is an acceptance and sincere belief amongst owners that a rising tide will lift all ships. I think there's so much petty squabbling. There's so much sort of everyone trying to make sure that their neighbour doesn't get a leg up that undermines things. I think that is political as well. We've talked about it on the podcast before. The reason that Roma have never broken ground in a new stadium is because Roman politics is toxic. Like, it's completely impossible to do things because, frankly, it just takes, if you're Roma, it takes one Lazio supporter in the wrong level of politics to turn around and decide he's going to make your life difficult, and he will. And, that stuff's really hard to unravel, and I don't think you unravel it with this sort of punitive system of you sort of will get punished for not using youth team players. The problem is I can say all that and then feel like I still don't have like a better answer to give you. I would love for more Italian clubs to turn around and say, let's give our academy player a game ban. Sorry to single him out. Frank Ribery, as Salernitana, signing a great big contract when he's already 37 and his injury history suggests he's not going to be able to contribute that much. But I understand Salernitana in Serie A for a moment, wanting to have a media splash, wanting to have a moment of like, everyone comes down, takes a photograph, our club's name is in the limelight for a minute. So they're complicated. They're complicated issues.
Yeah,
go.
No, I was going to say, like, the problem is that I know that, look, youth is amazing, but at the end of the day, unfortunately, we do live in a world where media matters, right? And so the whole point is that sometimes if we are going to play, and I agree, because you were mentioning a point of, for goodness sakes, like Allegri will choose Danilo in midfielder than actually go into and dip into the market and find someone. I actually agree with you on a base level. Yes, it's really shocking to see that. But we also have to have the support of everyone. All these people who are criticizing Allegri for not doing that, criticize Pirlo for relying on players like Portanova and giving other players a chance. And I was like, oh, for goodness sakes, can you just play some of the adults here? We don't seem to even get on board with our own criticism. Everything keeps changing all the time, depending to what the right narrative should be. As long as we just criticize, we're happy. But this is where I feel like is the main point of Italian football in general. We didn't like the fact that Pirlo relied so much on that and didn't understand how to use the full squad and keep all these players happy and make sure that we got the best out of Ronaldo. Then we criticize Allegri because he doesn't do that enough, And then there's this constant back and forth. And then we get upset when Milan don't win 55 games in a row. They're kids. Like, give them a chance. That's what happens. It happens that when you are playing with 20, 22-year-olds, they're not going to be as consistent as a Luka Modric, because that they're still learning and they will still make mistakes. And yes, you may have a kid that's as brilliant as Tomori, but even Tomori will make mistakes. And you have to be okay with that. Rather than you come up next day and say, Maldini didn't invest well in the market. And then it just, we have to either all be on board and show the level of patience that, like I said, certain English clubs do and believe in what is being built. And we sit there and think to ourselves, it's not pathetic when Volpato is being given a chance at Roma. And we actually applaud Jose Mourinho for doing that rather than trying to wonder what his real conspiracy theory is. But on the other side, again, I don't think it's the use of kids. I don't think if we played 75 kids against North Macedonia, we would have won. I think it's just much more than that. There is a desire to have Zlatan Ibrahimovic in Milan because it is also about gaining from that experience. Actually, historically speaking, the teams that end up lifting the trophies usually have an average age of 27 to 28. They do tend to be a little bit older. So I think Inter was the oldest squad last year when they won it because there is that experience of having been there before and knowing how to continue doing that. So I don't want to just say that and make that constantly this whole thing of, because unfortunately Ribery sells a few shirts, which allows them to invest more in their youth academy, which allows them to do more. And it's all this whole grassroots thing. Manchester City has the most amazing youth academy. How much have they relied on it? And, La Fabrica is really famous in Real Madrid. It's actually the youth department that makes the most money. Really, because everyone knows La Masia, because they actually utilize it in the team much more than Real Madrid do. So, but you do need it to invest in the club. So, unfortunately, there are moments where you do have to bring in a Tevez or a Ribery, who are a little bit older or coming from leagues where there was lots of question marks about Tevez arriving here and not being brilliant, But these are things that we sometimes have to do to get our name in the headlines.
Yeah, so I think the other thing that where this problem starts, in my opinion, is very often it's not at the level of who's on the bench making a decision, do I start you or you? This problem starts with, are there good enough players coming through from the first step of the Italian academy system? And I do think one thing that does strike me as definitely being true is, you look at some of the clubs that have had the most successful business models in Italy in the last few years, clubs like Atalanta and, and Udinese, and they've found it very sort of financially prudent to spread their net very wide, to bring in players from abroad and be able to, not all of them, plenty of players come in, don't make a profit, but like enough of those players flip them for a good profit a few years later that the system works, right? Like you can keep balancing your books that way. And the question I always sort of wonder is, why is there not at least a greater percentage of those players that you're doing that with coming from your own country? Because your own country should be the easiest place to find the young kid, right? You don't have to go around the world sending someone scouting. And, Atalanta in some ways is a bad example because they do actually have an academy set up that does bring in Italian players as well. But I feel like actually like the thing that you could do if you really wanted to fix this problem, the thing that you could do at a central level, at a football federation level, at a national level, make it easier for clubs to invest in their academies, make it easier for your clubs to invest in better structures that give more opportunities to more young players in their areas. And you'll probably start to see the fruits that way by actually sort of trying to resolve the root of the problem rather than trying to punitively fix it at the end of the problem.
Okay, our next question is from Omer from All UV podcast, and he asks, do you think clubs in Serie A prefer to recycle older players rather than giving the spots to youth players? If so, do you see a reason behind it? We're actually going to go into this question because we answered Zach so heavily, and it's pretty much a similar question. We hope that you found your answer there. It is, I guess, media, it is experience, it is that desire to sort of make money to get into the top 4 or to get into the top 6, because actually there's a difference in how much you make depending on where you finish in the season. And sadly, that this is the time right now in which clubs are just trying to find any detail that they can, which is why Italy's paying Turkey. It's 3 million, right? To just try to make ends meet and get their football back on so that they can actually invest in their clubs, invest in good fitness coaches, invest in scouts, so on and so forth. But thank you to Omer from All UV podcast. We always like supporting other podcasts.
Yeah, just all I would add to that is, some clubs, yes, some clubs less so, and there's always different coaches with different priorities and different approaches to the game. And there's Serie A is not a monolith, even though sometimes it feels like it. I think we're done for this episode. We witted on as we always do. I hope you all enjoyed it. I always enjoy it because I get to hang out with Mina and talk about football. If you missed our main podcast this week, it was a really fun one. We had Adriano Del Monte on, and even though we were talking about topics that made us sad, we had a really interesting conversation. Do go back and check that out if you haven't already.